today with Bernice Tipton of Ionia, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay. Now, Mrs. Tipton, can you start by telling us a little bit about your background? To start with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Springville, Utah on January the 3rd, 1924.
Okay. Now, did you grow up in Utah?
Yes.
Okay.
I went through school there, and part of my college was there,
Okay.
Utah State and Brigham Young.
Okay. And what did your family do for a living in those days?
In the beginning of my life, my father was a blacksmith, and then he went to work for road contractors and became a master mechanic. When I was growing up, we often spent time in road camps on dirt floors and in tents, and he did some blacksmithing then because they used horses in order to build the roads. Later, as trucks and so forth came in, he became a master mechanic.
Okay. But was he able to keep his job through the 30s?
Yes.
Okay.
We didn't have a lot of money, but he did work all through that time. We had to watch our pennies, but we didn't have hard times like some people did.
Okay. Now, how many children were in the family?
Well, there's 3 daughters. One is 10 years younger than I am. The other is 24 years younger than I am. So it was 3 families.
Okay. So you started out anyway, it was just you and your parents, and then
Yes.
eventually they had...
Till I was 10 years old.
Okay. And then where did you actually go to school then, if you're moving around or that kind of thing?
Well, I went through high school in Springville, Utah.
Okay. And how big a town was that?
About 5,000.
Okay. So we could have a decent-sized high school and
Oh, yes,
that
yes.
kind of thing.
There was about 105 in my graduating class.
All right. And then you were still in school then when Pearl Harbor happened?
When Pearl Harbor happened, yes, I was a senior in high school.
And do you remember when you first heard about that?
Yes. I was a student director of school play, and it was Sunday, and we were going to practice for the play, and about noon, and someone brought a radio with them, and we heard about Pearl Harbor.
Okay. Now, before that happened, had you been paying much attention to what was going on in the world? There was a war going on in Europe and that kind of thing?
Oh, yes, we had that in high school classes.
Okay. And did you know people who were already going off to join the Army or being drafted in 41 before that?
You bet. Many, many, many people.
Okay. Then, did it occur to you when the war started that you might actually have an opportunity to get involved in it?
Well, since the women started becoming part of the military, that was in 1920. That was in 1942,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when I graduated from high school. So that was a new situation in the Army.
Okay. But before you joined the WACs, you went to college for a while first?
Yes, I had a year and a half of college before I went into the service. We couldn't go in until we were 20 years old.
So were you just waiting until you could join at that point?
No, I had no idea I was going in.
Okay.
2 of my friends had set up an interview, and they invited me to join. And I did. But this was for the airwacs that they were interested in. They both had brothers in the service. And of course, I knew those brothers well. And so I did join with them to hear the recruiter.
Okay. So how did the recruiter describe the airwacs, or why was that particularly interesting to you?
Well, everything was new in the service at that time. This was 1944. The WACs had only been in existence for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I went in shortly after the auxiliary was dropped. At first it was the WAAC, and right after they dropped that to WAC, it was when I decided that I'd see what they had to offer.
Now, as far as you could tell, was there a difference between it being an auxiliary corps and just Women's Army Corps? Was it more military now, or?
I think it was about the same.
Mhm.
It was just that they didn't want to be an auxiliary
Okay,
anymore.
just a recognition they were doing something important.
Right.
Okay, all right. Now, did you have any idea what sort of work you might be doing for them when you signed up?
Well, of course, we had quite an interview, and they knew what I was capable of doing, so I did not know exactly. There wasn't any of us that knew exactly what we would be doing.
Okay, so in the interview, what kind of things did they want to know? Just how much schooling you had, or?
Yes, and where we had worked, if we had worked
Mhm.
before, and so on. I'd had quite a bit of office training, and both in college and high school, and I had worked in some offices besides.
Okay, so there is some stuff that they'll be able to use.
Yes.
Okay, now where did they send you for training?
I went to Des Moines, Iowa. I knew this. To Fort Des Moines it
Okay.
was, okay, which was a military base there.
Now, what did your training consist of?
This was in January, so when we arrived, it was very cold and the snow was very deep. We weren't very impressed. Fort Des Moines was a very old fort, so most of the buildings were brick, but we lived in, ours was just a wooden barracks. We trained in military history, in military manners, how we should treat officers and so on, all that sort of thing. We marched a lot. We had to know how to fold our clothes in our foot lockers, how to make our beds so that the dime
Bounces
would
off.
pop up. And we scrubbed floors and we did windows, even though it was zero weather outside. We marched and marched and marched. That wasn't too hard for me because I'd been in marching band for about 5 years, so that helped.
Did they have much other physical training, or just the marching?
All the physical training we could do under the conditions of the weather. We were supposed to go through training with gas masks, but they had to put that off because it was so cold. They couldn't continue with that, but it didn't matter anyway because we weren't going overseas.
Right.
So that was kind of a joke anyway.
All right. And then what kind of people were training you? Did you have drill sergeants, or?
Oh, yes. And there were WACs. This was strictly Army. This, so far, was just Army training.
Okay. And about how long did that phase last?
It was I think it was 6 weeks.
And then having completed that, do you get more specialized training, or do they just send you to a base?
No, from there we got our orders to go to an airfield, yes.
Okay. Now, were all of the women you were training with, were they all training for the women's group for the Air Corps, or were they
No,
going all over the place?
It was mixed,
Okay. So you all get the same basic training, and then they
Right.
move you out from there.
right.
Okay. So then where did they send you then for your assignment?
I was sent, I think God answered our prayers. I was sent to Barksdale Field in Shreveport, Louisiana. The difference between Barksdale, getting off the train, we always went by train. Getting off at Barksdale and being in Des Moines in February was very different. We saw green grass, flowers blooming, trees, and it was quite a shock. Barksdale is a very old base. I shouldn't say that. Barksdale was a new base after World War One. They built it. I can tell you a little bit more about here. The government after World War I bought 26,000 acres of cotton plantation, and they built this airfield. It was dedicated in 1933, and it was named after a World War I pilot. When we arrived, it was part of the 3rd Air Force and was used to train B-26 crews. Later, they expanded the runways to accommodate 29s. And in 1944, an MP training unit with their dogs moved in, and also a chemical unit moved into it. The main buildings, including the headquarters and the housing for officers and enlisted, were French colonial and made of brick and stone. The halls and stairways in the headquarters building were marble. And this was a permanent base, and it's still used today. I have a grandson in the Air Corps, and he has been stationed there on and off. So they're still using that field today.
Now, did they have the WACs in a separate quarters or a separate part of the base, or?
No. The WAC barracks were built about a mile from the front gate, off in the middle of a bare field. There weren't any trees, there were no bushes or shrubs, they were just wooden buildings, which was quite a contrast to the other buildings. They had us located out in this field, and there was one road that went around it. There was 2 barracks, a mess hall, and an office building. They weren't used to women being in the service, and they didn't know what to do with us. The rules were very strict. Our day room was used for PT in bad weather, and our mess hall was a favorite place for officers to eat because our food was better. They all got the same food, but our cooks knew what to do with it, so they liked to come to dinner. I might say here that it was later when I realized and knew the comparison with the way they treated us and the way they treated the blacks at that time. We were isolated, so were they. They couldn't be in the same place. They had their own PX, and we could go to the big PX, they couldn't, but we also had our own PX where we could buy most of the things we needed. They weren't allowed to go into the movies in the big movie building, which was air conditioned. We could do that, but they couldn't. But they didn't know what to do with us, I don't think. Our rules were very strict. We rode a little trolley to work, even. It was placed out that far, so it was different.
Okay. Now, what kind of work did you do?
I was assigned to the statistical section. I said, I can't even say it, let alone work there. And I became a statistical clerk typist. I was a fairly good typist, so that didn't surprise me any. And this was in the headquarters building where we had the marble floors and the marble stairways and so on. One of our jobs was the daily strength report. It was classified material, and it showed exactly how many men were on the base, how many was on leave, and how many were in the hospital, how many cooks, drivers, pilots, and so forth could be located, so that in a very short time they could find whomever they needed. These were long reports, and it was before electric typewriters or computers and so forth. We cut stencils and used the old typewriters that you had to throw back. We had 2 civilians working in the office, and they wouldn't work on weekends, so we had to. And that was fine with us. That's what we were there for. We were told, and I didn't say this at the beginning, but we were told that we were to relieve men from their jobs so they could go overseas.
Mhm.
Well, it didn't take us long to find out that most of those men did not want to be relieved from their jobs, and they weren't too happy with us.
Now, when you came to that base, were you sort of the first group of women to go in there?
No, they were established. There
Okay.
was quite a few women there by that
Mhm.
time. A lot of them had just been pulled from the wax into the Air Corps because
Mhm.
that was a new designation.
Right. Okay. But there were still men around who were getting replaced by women, or were just afraid of being replaced by women? Or?
Yeah, yes, that continued throughout the war, I think.
Right. About how many WACs were on the base, do you think?
Oh my.
About how big was the barracks, I guess?
Well, there were 2 barracks, 2-story,
Mhm.
typical. I don't know how many people they held. I would say there might have been 75 to 100, not 100 though, probably about 75.
And were the barracks set up like men's barracks, just big
Yes.
open dormitory with a
You
bunch of
bet.
cots?
Yes,
Okay.
sir. With 1 bathroom downstairs with showers and just like the men's.
Mhm.
We had bunk beds just like the men's. Foot locker, that was and a place to hang our clothes, that was it.
Okay. And the office you were working in, about how many people were working in there with you, do you think?
In my
Yeah.
office. There were 2 of us WACs, 1 civilian girl, 2 officers, and I think 2 other enlisted men.
Mhm. And did you work with pretty much the same group of people the whole time you were there?
Yes, as long as I was there 13 months.
And from there, were you paying a lot of attention to what was happening in the war or with the Air Corps or things like that, or did you just
Oh, yes.
focus?
No. We knew what was happening. We were training these men, like we said, B-26 pilots,
Mhm.
or not pilots, these were crews
Right.
that came in and were trained just before they went overseas.
So was this a place where all of the crews for an aircraft would get together and work together?
Right, take their training.
Okay. Did you have much contact at all with the men who were being trained, or did they keep you away from them?
Well, some of the women did. It depended upon your job. My job did not, I did not come into contact with them because it was more on the base order.
Mhm.
So, but some of the women did. We had women in weather and photography and drivers of trucks, and they did just about everything.
Mhm. All right. And what kind of backgrounds did these women have? Were they from all over the place, or?
All over the United States, all ages. I mean, it was interesting. The base commander did not believe in women being in the service, like most of these men didn't at
Mhm.
the time. And when he found out he was going to have a WAC secretary, no way. Then they told him he had to have a WAC driver. Well, that was terrible. It ended up that his secretary was wonderful. She'd had a lot of experience. She even made sure that he was dressed correctly and so on when he went out, when he had his coffee and the whole works, and he wouldn't have anyone else. Then he found out that this driver was excellent, and no way was he going to have a man replace her then. We were all very pleased that these gals could turn his ideas around and find out that women could do some of these jobs and do them well. So
Okay. And was this something that you thought much about or talked much about, the idea that you were kind of being pioneers and doing new things that women hadn't done before? Or were you just doing your job then?
We were aware of the way people felt about it. They saw us in uniform, and many of them just wanted to ignore us. We had people who were very kind at times when we'd go out to dinner. Why, somebody would pay the whole check and be very kind and thank us. But mostly the women in uniform were not too, people weren't too pleased about women being in uniform.
Okay.
We were supposed to be ladies. That was part of our training, basic training, was do not draw attention to yourself. Well, this was impossible. A uniform itself drew attention. And so anything you did, it didn't matter if you dropped a fork on the floor, you were drawing attention because you had on a uniform. But we had to make sure that we were ladies. We didn't cross our legs like I'm doing now. You cross them at the ankles when you sit down, things like that. So, and most of these women were wonderful. They were there to do a job. Some of them had husbands, brothers in the service. They were hard workers. You always find a few that will ruin the reputation of the rest, but these were wonderful women. I had some very good friends.
Okay. Now, did you pay much attention to publicity about women in the armed forces, or the stuff that would show up in the popular media, like magazines or newsreels and stuff? Did you see yourself in those things, or notice what was being said or written about you?
Not a lot.
Okay.
There really wasn't, I don't think, a lot. It was just a negative feeling wherever we went.
Okay.
So.
How often did you get to go off the base? Could you go into Shreveport or that kind of thing?
Well, we worked on weekends, but we'd have a day off, yes. And we didn't go in a lot. We managed to keep pretty busy, and there was something I was going to tell you now. I can't remember what it was.
Well, if you did go in, how did you get in town? Was there a shuttle or a bus, or did you get a Jeep, or what did you do?
You'd go in on a bus, on a bus all the time. I didn't tell you too much about the clothing that was issued to us when we first went in, which I think is quite important because a lot of people don't know. We had to send everything, all of our civilian clothing went back home. They sent it all back home. We had 10 cotton underclothes, okay, and cotton stockings for work. We only had one pair of silk stockings and nylons. You couldn't get nylons. Our underpants were long-legged, and we were issued sleeveless vests of cotton to wear over our own bras. They gave us summer and winter clothing, which included skirts below the knees, shirts and blouses. The blouses were jackets and ties. There was a winter dress with long sleeves, a winter overcoat, and an all-season utility coat. Our shoes were brown medium-heeled Oxfords, and we had a pair of KP boots, which the boots came just above the ankle. For PT, we wore striped seersucker shirtwaist dresses with bloomers underneath. And these were the kind of bloomers with legs with elastic around the legs. The summer clothes were khaki tan, and the winter was olive green, olive drab or green. We had pajamas, but no robes. nothing fit us right. We all looked like something out of World War I. We were not to draw too much attention to ourselves. And like I said, but we did because of the uniforms that we had. So, and when I first went in, we wore what we called hobby hats. And I have a picture there for you later. These were like a pillbox with a brim in front. And they had to fit very tight because when the wind hit that brim, they would go flying. And they had to fit so tight they gave us all headaches. So it wasn't until about 6 months later after I went in, they finally gave us hats like the nurses wore, so that we looked different, and it felt much better. But we were to have that uniform on, even though we went home for furlough. We weren't supposed to take it off. Of course, some of us cheated just a little bit then, but...
But you'd wear it when you were traveling, though?
Absolutely. You weren't supposed to be out of uniform at all, not in civilian clothes at all. So.
Okay. Did they have regulations about how long you wore your hair or things like that?
Oh, yes. Immediately before I even enlisted, I had to have my hair cut short. Couldn't be on your collar. I often, later on, at first I had it cut short with a permanent, and then I wore it in braids so that I could have it a little bit longer, but it had to be off the collar.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because I think the WASPs, the Women's Auxiliary Pilots Corps, they actually were supposed to have their hair longer, or there were regulations about that all the different versions of how much do you make them look like girls or something like that. Okay.
No, they were very strict about that. So.
Okay. What other aspects about the experience that you had down in Louisiana kind of stand out for you? Have you got particular incidents or things that you've reported here?
We had to stand retreat every Friday. The WAC company had to stand retreat, which meant we went out on the parade field at 5, I think it was 5 o'clock, and march and stand retreat while the band played the Star Spangled Banner and the flag came down and so on. This was hard to do in the summer because in the summer it gets very hot down there, and you had to be in full uniform with tie and blouse and everything on. And there were many people passing out on the parade field at that time. You just let them pass out. No one do anything about it. Just kind of step over them as you marched off. But that was very interesting, but very nice. I came from a very patriotic family, and so the patriotism there really showed, and I enjoyed that, even though I almost passed out once in a while.
Would somebody eventually pick up the people who passed out or help them get up?
Eventually, or they'd come to and get up or something.
Right. And so you're there basically for 13 months, so you're getting into early 1945 at that point. Now, did you get a furlough in there someplace, or did you get a furlough between assignments, or?
Get a furlough about every 6 months, usually, unless there was something happening that you couldn't.
Okay. Were there ever kinds of emergency moments on the base or unusual things happening that interrupted the routine, or could you pretty much just follow the same routine the whole time?
At that field, it was pretty routine. I can't remember of any thing happening. See, this was before VE Day and so on. So.
Right. Okay. And then after the 13 months in Louisiana, then where do you go next?
Well, I was having trouble with sinus down in Louisiana, and there was a military police company on our base with their dogs. Incidentally, we used to watch them train dogs. That was going to be transferred to Buckley Field in Denver, Colorado. And of course, that's high altitude, and I knew that the sinus wouldn't be so bad, so I asked if I might be transferred with them. And I got the okay, but I couldn't work in statistics because their statistical section was filled up. So they assigned me to the classification unit, and I transferred with them to Buckley Field, Colorado. And what a difference that was. This was really a shock. Buckley was located about 15 miles east of Denver, in the middle of wheat fields and sagebrush, and here I came from a permanent base in Louisiana. No trees, no landscaping. The buildings were all framed with tar paper on the outside. This was a temporary base. We ate at the hospital. We lived in the barracks close by. We were on temporary duty. From there we were assigned to Lowry Field, which was in a little closer to Denver. There wasn't any officers. We didn't have officers over us. There were only about 5 WACs on the base, and they worked in the hospital. They were giving us barracks close by the hospital. So different, we weren't isolated. It was just a different way of life. Well, while I was there, VE Day, Victory in Europe, was May 7th, 1945. But we didn't do any celebrating. We just kind of made a sigh of relief and went on working. That was the way we celebrated that. Our job in classification was mostly record keeping and testing. We did testing. We used a card called the Form 20 that had the history of each military person on it. We could tell what he or she did as a civilian, how much schooling they had, what their health was, and every job that they had while they were in the military. So in seconds, the entire Army and civilian background of any military person on base could be checked. And they could be placed where they could do the most good for the war effort.
Okay. So then, were you processing sort of new recruits who were training on the base so they could go somewhere else, or you were just collecting the information, just working with the information they already had?
Well, this card went with them wherever they went, okay? We didn't have new military on there.
Okay.
It ended up, after the war came to an end, that we were getting people from overseas. We kept them until they could go to a place to be discharged. So ours was mostly just record keeping, but we did do some testing too, IQ testing and so on. While I was there, I was offered the opportunity to go to Maxwell Field in Montgomery, Alabama for special training, which I did. It was a month's training in classification. I came back then as a classification specialist. So I had a different MOS, and at that time I was also promoted to buck sergeant. So I was back in the South again when I went to Alabama, but it didn't last very long.
All right. Now, when you were in Colorado, you said, you changed bases? You went from Buckley into Lowry at the end, or did you just stay on Buckley the
No,
whole
we
time?
stayed in Buckley.
Okay. Now, with only a small number of WACs on the base, did you have a lot more contact with male personnel, or were you still isolated pretty well from everybody?
Well, for a while we still worked in base headquarters, so we had contact with personnel coming in, and we were the ones that told them where they could go.
Mm-hmm.
When the war was over and they started bringing all these men in from overseas, that was quite a deal, because these men came in and we'd ask them what they preferred to do, although we had their,
Mm-hmm.
well, they all either wanted to drive trucks or go home. We couldn't send them home. They were there to wait until a discharge, they could be sent to a discharge place. And there wasn't that many trucks. So many of them were assigned to very odd jobs around the base. Some of them weren't very happy, but you could only do so much. So.
Okay, because I've interviewed quite a few men who talk about coming back from overseas and having to sit around for a while on a base, or sometimes they had a lot left on their enlistments and
Right.
didn't have anything really that they were supposed to do. So it was your job to help figure out what to do with them.
We assigned so many to our office that we didn't have desks for them. So we had to double up on desks. My husband happened to be assigned to my desk. That's where I met him. But and he had an awful attitude, but we won't go into that. But these men, they couldn't understand why we couldn't give them decent jobs. But you know, you've only got so many things you can do. So.
Right.
And so they just blanked classification, and that's where. And my MOS was frozen, and so when a lot of the women went back home and were discharged, I couldn't get out of the service for a while until we got through this group of people coming back from overseas. So.
Okay, because one of the things that happened at the end of the war was there was sort of a general push to make room for the men returning. And so were some of them coming in and replacing women in some of the jobs with the Air Forces? Or I guess there wasn't anyone to replace you for a while, but were some of the other women being replaced by men, or?
Well, I'll tell you, they even brought women recruiters in for a while. But they went out fairly fast,
Mm-hmm.
too, because they didn't have MOSs, so were frozen. So, and no, actually the Army was trying to downgrade and get, rid of a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
at that time.
Yeah, so sort of men and women, so everybody gets smaller at that point.
Tried to get them out as fast as we could.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, did you ever go off the base much when you were in Colorado, or did you just stay where you were?
Some, but it was quite a ways into Denver, so we didn't go off, and we had to ride a bus in. Didn't go off, and we were worked. Many a night I worked until 12 o'clock at night. We didn't get paid overtime or anything like that.
What did you get paid anyway? What would a buck sergeant
I
make?
can't remember what it was at the end, but at the beginning, I did put that down here. My pay at the beginning was $21 a month for 4 months, and then it would go up to $30, and it stayed there. I don't think I ever made over 100. It seems like it was around 90. So we were paid low.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had low pay, but
Now, were there many things that you had to buy for yourselves that maybe men wouldn't have to buy? I mean, how far did $30 a month go if you're in the Army?
you didn't save a lot. It went quite a ways because we didn't have to buy clothing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we did some. The shoes didn't fit right, so but they still had to be brown Oxfords and so on. And you didn't have to buy food. Some of the recreation you had, so I never went in debt, we'll put it
Right.
that way.
Right.
But I didn't save a lot either.
Didn't save a whole lot either. All right. But I guess in a way for you, because of the job you had, ending the war actually made you maybe busier? Because you had all those men to process who were coming through?
Yes, I did in that particular job, yes. But we were always busy because there was always men, you know, people that had to be placed into jobs and so on, and testing. There was a lot of testing going on.
Okay. Now, what had your husband done in the military? What had he done before he showed up in Lowry?
My husband was a gunner on a B-17, served 35 missions out of Italy. They bombed into Germany and northern Italy and so on and so forth.
But he was fortunate enough to make it through 35 missions and come home.
He made it through. It was very interesting. We went to some, what do I want to say, reunion type deals. And I learned a lot, and then every year these stories that came back got bigger and bigger. But he was able to get together with his crew, so I got to know his crew and so on. He was also recalled for the Korean War. And my training in service, of course we were married then, helped very much in being a military wife in the Korean War, so that worked out good.
Okay, so then you're discharged then early in 46, so you spent about 2 years there.
Yes,
okay.
February 46.
Okay. Now, had you gotten married yet, or did you get married after you both
No, we got married
finished?
afterwards. He was from Nebraska, so we married, and then we both went back to college and graduated from the University of Nebraska.
Okay. And what did you get your degree in?
Education.
Okay. And then did you work as a teacher then after that, or?
We moved around a good deal. Part of that was in the service, and he went to work for Exxon and marketing. And when I moved here, it was my 33rd move. Marketing kept us busy. I think we lived in about 15 different states. That's when I said to you that I wasn't from this area, although one of those moves was to Battle Creek. I said I'd never come back to Michigan. Here I am. So never say never.
So how did you wind up in Michigan then?
My son is here.
Okay.
And at this age, I needed to be close to someone in the family. I came here from Tennessee.
All right. If you look back on the time that you spent in the service, how do you think that affected you, or what did you learn from that?
I've never regretted my time in the service. Like I said at the beginning, am I going too far?
No, you're fine.
Like I said in the beginning, we couldn't go until we were 20. We couldn't go in unless at 20, you had to have your parents' consent. My dad said that if he ever had a son, he would send him into the Army because he thought that the discipline was so good. Well, he didn't have a son, so I kind of figured, well, I guess it's up to me, you know. So he was perfectly willing. My mother said if she was younger, she'd go with me. And like I said before, my father had been in World War I. This was a patriotic family. I was raised that way. I never regretted my time in the service. I learned a lot. It was a different way of living. It was the first time I'd been away from my family. Well, I won't say that because I'd gone to college for a little bit, but you know, you could get home then if you had to. I met a lot of wonderful friends, some of whom I'm still in contact with, and it's just been great. And I really appreciate people now starting to recognize the fact that the women did have a part in it. Because we went a long time without any recognition, so.
Right. But it's pretty much standard in the histories these days to recognize sort of how many women went in and how many different kinds of things they were going and doing. But in the meantime, now we've got your story, and this is one people will be able to see you telling about where you went and what you did,
Well,
and that's on a permanent record.
I appreciate it. About 2 years ago, it was the first time I felt like a real recognition, and I got a nice thank you letter from the young Marines in Tennessee.
Mhm.
So that made me feel good. And then not long ago, and I'll show you my things here, I had a lady who'd been a lieutenant colonel in the service, a young lady who had retired. They retire young nowadays. Who asked me if I was in the Women's Memorial for Military Women in Washington, D.C. I told her no, so she said she'd like to sponsor me, so I am now there too. So my family was there in Washington, D.C. about 2 months ago, and they looked my record up there and said it's there. So
There we go. All right. Well, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today and tell your story.
well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right.